We are doing a spoiler breakdown. We have 3 new cards to review. There have been 3 new spoilers. It's going to be pretty excellent. And I'm pretty excited about all 3 of these. They look really interesting. There's one that's a little bit more of a fill-ish card that's going to do some really interesting things for Shadow. The one we're going to talk about first is the first one to get spoiled, which got spoiled yesterday. I chose not to do a breakdown on it and figured there'd be a couple more today, so we could talk about a few more and have a really good time with it. All right, so here's the first one. It's Waker of Ancients. Your units with 5 strength or more have warp. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with this card. It is a 1-2 for 2, which is not a amazing stat line. Voice of the Speaker has the same stat line, and it is not a stat line that influences the board on the turn that it comes out, typically. However, similar to Voice of the Speaker, if you can jump through the correct hoops to get the advantage out of this card, it is actually quite good. And the longer it sticks around, which is very, very likely to stick around, it is really, really important that it does. So, like, getting good 2-drops into, like, slower control decks can be really, really useful because they can draw removal cards away from your bigger stuff. And if they don't draw the removal cards, then sometimes they just get you your bigger stuff in larger numbers. So Waker of Ancients does some pretty cool things. If you warp Twin Brood Sauropod, as someone is asking right now, you only get one thing. It does not draw the card, so you don't get Echo. Same simple interaction with pretty much every warp and Echo thing. You can also do some stuff where, like, you can give War Cries to things and see the War Cries on top and do it that way. The card that this interacts with really well, actually, is if you're playing 5-power Praxis, there is a 5-4 that costs 4, it turns out, for double red influence, that reduces the cost of the top card of your deck by 4. So you attack with it, you hit with it, you get the reduction of cost, you already know what's on top of your deck because the thing on top of your deck has warp, and then you play it for extremely cheap and probably get a chance to even play another warp card here. Waker of Ancients, similar to Waystone Infuser, represents significant value the longer it is out, which means that it is a card that actually does present what you would call a continuous threat. It is not a card that threatens the board by itself, but if you are playing a deck that is filled with lots of 5 strength or more drops, then it is a card that has to be dealt with because it gives your opponent a fairly important clock in terms of value. Every time that your opponent ignores this card, there is a fairly high chance, about 1 in 3, that you're going to get a card of advantage that you would not otherwise have out of Waker of Ancients. So straight Praxis is a really simple way to use this deck. This also works pretty well in more complicated decks like Elysian Praxis or something like Red-Yellow Shadow with cards like Impending Doom and not Cabal Countess. There are a lot of, like, sort of aggressive shadow cards that you can play that will have 5 strength or more. So there's a good Xenon archetype here as well. If you want to, like, splash a little red into Xenon, Waker of Ancients can do some pretty good work there. So yeah, units with 5 power or more have warp is a pretty strong ability. I think this card is probably like, it's definitely got a lot of potential. I'm not sure if it's going to be like a super powerhouse card, but it's definitely going to make the decks that it is put into, and a lot of times it's going to make the decks that it's put into just really devastating cards. Similar to Friendly Wisp, you can actually do things with this card where you play it late and actually get a lot more value out of it. So for example, after you've already got your 5-4 down, that gives you the cost reduction, or if you've, like, played a bunch of Stone Shakers, I think Stone Shaker 5-power drops is really, really interesting with Waker of the Ancients, because if you have a bunch of Stone Shakers, then your Waker of the Ancients costs 0. You play Waker of the Ancients for 0, you play a 5-drop off of the top of your deck and another 5-drop off the top of your deck. Or, like, the more that you can reduce the cost of cards in your deck, the more likely it is that you can get into a warp out scenario. And the scenario where you warp all of the cards in your deck is really, really a lot more likely with Waker of the Ancients than it may even be with, like, solid, just completely built warp decks. So you can build, like, a mix of warp cards and 5 strength or more cards, and, like, actually just get, like, a much more balanced deck that also has that ability to just do the complete warp out dream and warp every card in your deck for forever. So it's great. It's good. It's good stuff. This card, of course, works with Sandstorm Titan. Nothing like a buff to Sandstorm Titan. Everyone loves it. I think that basically, like, this is really interesting as a 2-drop in Praxis, and I'm not sure that Praxis had an amazing 2-drop up to this point, so it works pretty well. I'm pretty excited about this card. I think it definitely contributes to an interesting Praxis archetype. I don't think it adds an intense amount of strength to the bigger mid-range Praxis. Like, I don't think this card makes those decks. It does make those decks different, however, while continuing to maintain their power level. And that's really important for making a diverse meta. So, yeah, Waker Vengeance is a really exciting card, and it's a really fun one to play with. I don't see why we wouldn't like this one. It's really, really cool. Okay. So for some reason I can't edit this. Let's just go ahead and I can fix that pretty easily. There we go. Okay, so next thing we do is we change the spoiler. All right, this is pretty fun. The next one is Kindle, and Kindle is doing something real interesting. All right, so cam's a little wobbly. Yeah, we're on a table right now. I will get a desk at some point, but I don't have the money for one right now. Okay, so Kindle. +4 power this turn, +5 power this turn instead if you have Spark, for 3. Okay, so this is a ritual, which in Magic is something that we use to call cards that give you power for free in a way that is like pretty effective. People making bad jokes about the Grenadin art because of the way it's lying. The one that I saw in the Reddit was pretty good. It was detonate me like one of your French girls. I really like how this Grenadin is just like, I think the objective here is to see art where the Grenadin is just sort of like super relaxed about what it's doing. But yeah, it's pretty delightful. Okay. So yeah, this card works with Caldera Cradle and a bunch of other things. This is real exciting in a lot of interesting ways. So these cards are typically extremely powerful in open formats. The bigger that the formats get, like the more cards that we see printed, the better this card is going to be. Because it is a card that just gives you a bunch of free power for free, and it also tends to like give you a lot of just like really intensive fast ramp. Currently Fire is really about that sort of fast ramp idea. There is like an idea of ramp in there, but it's never had a discount as big as the Spark discount, which is to say 3 power for 5. Most of its discounts are 1 or more, and they're pretty hard to get. They're cards like Trail Stories, they're cards like Library Phoenix. They kind of cost you in a lot of different ways. Kindle costs you card advantage, but what you get in aggressiveness is actually really, really powerful. And that means that this card is just really strong for burn decks, for really aggressive stuff that uses things like Infernuses. It's really, really interesting for like anything that's doing very, very big spells like Obliterate. You can basically just use Kindle to generate an intense amount of power very, very quickly. And amongst other things, you can use Kindle to activate other Spark cards. One of the things that I think Kindle is really most strongly suited for here is a turn 6 Mullet and Nakova. Like, right away. Just attack for some amount of damage, play a Kindle, get up to Mullet and Nakova, play Mullet and Nakova, get that Spark. And if you get that Spark, along with the other Spark, it's pretty disgusting. Someone points out that Westwind Herald is kind of nuts with this. Yes, any recursion of a spell like Kindle is extremely powerful because Kindle's initial cost is what makes the power gain +2 instead of +5. So you can use Westwind Herald with this card to get some cards like Flame Blast or just like Obliterate or like anything that you want for relatively free, and that can be very, very effective if you just want to slam the board. In any type of Spark deck, this card really, really shines because it allows you to play multiple Sparks at the same time. You get a Spark, you play the Spark card, and then you play Kindle, play another Spark card, then play another Spark card, something like your 5-drops. You can do some crazy, crazy things if you actually get that Spark. If you don't get the Spark, this kind of mild benefit can get you up to, say, a turn 4 Sandstorm Titan, or a turn 3 Sandstorm Titan, or like do something crazy with that. Like you could go Initiative the Sands on 1, Rakano banner, or Praxis banner, and then attack with the Initiate, play a Sandstorm Titan. Like, you can do some really, really mean things with this card, and you can get some really, really nasty things as a result. There are some cards this doesn't work with as well. It's not great at playing Soulfire Drakes out of your deck. It's not great at playing cards that have charge effects, which Fire really, really likes. But it is very, very good at playing cards that really react to sparks or do interesting things. You can do some pretty good Westman Herald shenanigans with this. And that's pretty important because one of the things that we actually do know now, there was a spoil for like a mild piece of text which says that if you have all 4 heralds, something happens. And that means that there is definitely a Southwind Herald being released with Horus Travers. I would almost guarantee it at this point. So like you can do some cool things with Westman Herald. The card that I really like here is Sindok. Sindok is a card that already gets a discount for hitting your opponent, and Kindle makes that into an even bigger discount that allows you to play out Sindok much faster. Basically, Kindle is an incredibly big sweep for a really, really super aggressive deck, and if you're looking for decks that want to throw away cards to do insane, ridiculous things, Kindle's really strong here. Kindle makes Praxis Outlaw a viable deck, because you get to throw away cards and also play Praxis Outlaws off of these cards. You get to do like some really important things where basically you just toss your entire hand, and then you get very good benefits for tossing your hand because you still have more stuff to play. Like you can do some really cool things with Kindle in that respect. Kindle, if there's ever any sort of storm mechanic, any sort of card that like really cares about spells like Cardarian Cradle, like this is a Spells Matters card in a really important way. So it very much benefits the Caldarian Cradle archetype. That deck actually has some really reasonable plays now. It's got just a lot of good things going on with it, and I think that it's a really, really strong card in general. You can also use Kindle in some pretty cool Skycrag decks to do things like basically just generate a bunch of blue influence with, say, Skycrag Strangers, and then use Kindle to play Channel the Tempest, thus negating that card disadvantage that you run into, while also getting yourself up to like the faster decks. You can use it in, say, like weird Ironthorn decks that want to like do crazy ramp. This is a very, very good like immediate ramp that can do some pretty powerful stuff for you. So yeah, I think this card is insane. It is not always going to be an amazing card for you. It is not a card you play in every deck. The decks that you do play it in is extremely powerful, and you should very much respect that Spark. I think Kindle is actually going to make Spark a really interesting exchange. A lot of times you aren't forced as much into that decision about whether or not to block a unit when you think there might be a Spark here. I think the existence of good Kindle decks is going to make that block a lot more enticing, and that'll allow you to force your opponent into some maybe bad blocks as well. So Skycrag Spark looks like a real deck just because of Kindle, and I'm very excited about that. Skycrag Spell Matters looks like it might be a real deck because of Kindle. I'm super excited about that. So yeah, this card is probably my favorite of the 3. It's definitely my favorite of the 3 spoiled. It's really, really cool. There's a lot of interesting, like, fun interactions here, and there's a ton of stuff that you can do with it that is just like, it's a very inventive card. You can do some crazy things with it. It will enable decks for just ages to come. It is potentially gonna be overpowered. Like somebody could find a way to break this card. Rituals are traditionally cards that can break formats open. So this is a card that we could see like actually take over the format for a while before getting really, really badly nerfed. But I don't think that, like, I think that at its current cost and its current setup, it's probably in a good enough spot that it's going to be mostly just really exciting to play and very likely a staple for a pretty long time to come. So yeah, I'm psyched about this card. It is a really interesting card with a lot of interesting stuff going on. Be very glad that it costs 3. If this were like a cheaper effect where it was like +2 power for 1, +3 with a Spark, it would be bananas. It would be just disgusting. So yeah, it's quite excellent. So all right. So next thing, what else have we got? We got one more card. This is an interesting one. It's called Dueling Pistols. The picture is kind of terrible here, so this one's a little bit worse. I'm not sure why. It must have gotten spoiled on someone's stream or something like that. Okay, so this is +2/+0 quick draw, summon given enemy unit -2, -2. So similar to the 3-cost 2/1 quick draw in terms of overall stats. The 3-cost 2/1 quick draw is a reasonable stat line, but the main thing that's interesting about Dueling Pistol is that given enemy unit -2, -2. And yeah, it's pretty interesting as far as like what it does. So like there's a lot to say about this card. It gives you a pretty significant advantage. So yeah, this is a card where basically you get some amount of Oh, someone's found a better quality picture. Thank you for posting that. We will just go ahead and use that instead. And sorry that you got mostly timed out for that. I think it's totally allowed. Everything should be fine. All right. Okay, so let's change that around. We'll get the better picture up. That's not right. There we go. Okay, and now it's enormous, and I gotta make some changes. Oh no, it's not. It's the right size. Oh, but that's because I had the wrong size up before. Okay, so yeah, now we have dueling pistols. Okay, so here's the thing about dueling pistols. In terms of why this card costs 1 more than the 2/1 quick draw, the fact is that anything that has an immediate impact on board that is also a weapon can be very, very strong in an aggressive deck. This card will kill a unit and also make it the unit that it is put on unblockable for a turn or two. That means that if you play it onto a board that has a lot of small things, it will probably win that board for you in a way that's pretty significant. If you're playing Xenon Life Force, then this card really has a lot of strength because it gives you some pseudo removal. It behaves very well with life gain and lifesteal, and it really, really likes just the ability to just kill something, so it's good stuff. Thank you again, Dark Dream, for linking it. Yeah, so like, I don't know if I have too much to say about this card. It might not be powerful, it might be very powerful. I think that overall this card mostly just fills an interesting gap for Shadow that gives it a lot more interesting weapons and gives it some interesting sort of mid-range to more aggressive like tempo style that should be very, very fun to have. Like, you get some cool value out of this card. It's a good weapon to replay consistently, and it has some really interesting impact on the game. The more weapons that we have, the more cards like Rise to the Challenge start to support these weapon type decks. And we also get some better support for other cards that care about weapons, including the Cabal Interrogator, the Auric Bully. There's an Argenport deck in particular that really, really likes having weapons, and if you have weapons that give you value, then Argenport dueling pistols could actually be a thing. I think Argenport might be the best immediate fit for this deck. This also does work well on cards like Champion of Chaos, as people have pointed out. Giving something with quick draw and giving something with deadly and overwhelm quick draw is sort of the trifecta as far as things go. I think it's more interesting on cards with lifesteal, but it's also good on cards with deadly, which is what Shadow cards traditionally have. There are a lot of interesting things that you can put the card on. It does not have a huge immediate impact on the board, but that enemy unit -2/-2 does kill a lot of things that are pretty important to kill. And amongst other things, this makes it so that you have aggressive options that deal with Chalice decks, which we're always looking for more ways to have aggressive options that deal with Chalice decks. So that's something to consider. Yeah, overall, card has a decent amount of strength to it. It's definitely one of the less exciting of the spoilers that we've spoiled so far, but it's a cool value card, and I think it'll actually see some play. So, seems interesting. Seems like lots of fun. Okay, so that's it for the spoilers for today. As people have probably noticed from my Twitch title, I do have one other mild announcement. This one's basically just about the fact that Chairman Ajit Pai of the Federal Communications Commission, who many people probably know about by now, if you're at all interested in net neutrality, basically the idea that information should be free on the internet, there's been a lot of effort from the current FCC chair to dismantle those protections, and also to do some pretty terrible things, like give the impression that that is not something that people on the internet are unanimously opposed to. This guy has been just kind of very toxic for the current internet community. He's been a problem for a really long time. This is something that really helps out net neutrality, so I would urge you, if you are based in the United States, to call your senator and tell them that you oppose the re-election of Commissioner Ajit Pai, because that's something that affects people on the internet, something that affects everyone. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I encourage you to look up net neutrality, look up Ajit Pai. John Oliver has a really good piece on him if you want a cool humor piece that also explains it pretty well. But yeah, just wanted to note that, because that is a thing that's happening, that happens before October 2nd. So call him now. So that's the last bit of news. Thank you guys so much for watching. To the YouTube folks, thank you so much. Feel free to like or subscribe. And I am done for now. We're going to go ahead and go back to playing some Eternal.